called Running with the Giants, Running with the Giants. And what Running with the Giants is this. In the book of Hebrews, it says that life is like a race. It says that life is like a race and that it's like more like a marathon than a sprint. And it said, hey, those that have gone before us, the giants of our faith that have run the race in front of us, it's like it's kind of like they're in the stands and they're cheering us on. That's how it describes it in the book of Hebrews. And we said in this series, what if, instead of them just being in the stands, what if they could come out of the stands and actually run a lap with us in this race of life? What if they could come out here and they could say, hey, let me tell you, from being a hero in the Christian faith, I'm mentioned in the book of Hebrews, so it means that I'm a big hero of the faith. What if I could share with you my one life principle, what's made the biggest impact of my life? And so that's what we've been doing over the last few weeks. If you missed any of the messages, newbranch.net, you can check those out for yourself. But today, we're going to be talking about a lady who is one of the giants of the Christian faith, and her name is Esther. Her name is Esther. And here's what the lesson, I believe, and we're going to get into who Esther is, so if you don't know her, that's okay. We'll explain enough about her today where you can get to know her a little bit. Esther would say this. If she were to come out through the annals of time and speak through Scripture to us today, and I believe that's exactly what she's doing, I think she would say this: God has a place for you. God has a place for you. If you are a person and you've ever felt out of place, this is a message for you today. If you're a person and you say, hey, I'm not only have I felt out of place, but I have felt displaced. Or maybe you're in a weird time. Some of us have experienced some times in our lives where you go through this kind of weird transition. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, where it's like you kind of feel like I just don't know if I'm in the right thing. And it's more of a feeling than it is just the geography or what's happening, but it's just this kind of weird time of transition. Esther would come here today and she'd say, I know exactly how you feel, and let me tell you something. God has a place for you today. But in order to find that place, she's going to give us some things, how to find that place. So you're going to want to take some notes today, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the story of Esther, and then I'm going to give you some practical things from her life. So if you don't have a handout, you might want to get one, because you're going to want to take some notes today, because this is something that you're going to use really as a map of life, okay? So let me set up Esther for you. Turn with me to Esther chapter 2. Esther chapter 2 and verse 5. Let me set her up for you just a little bit. Esther lived at a time in the nation of Israel. In fact, here's what it says. Esther chapter 2 and verse 5. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. And what this means is this man named Mordecai, he came from a tribe of Judah, and then it explained his lineage. It's kind of like it's to show you he was connected as a Jewish person. That's why they're mentioning the names of his fathers. That he is a connected Jewish person. So if you were a Jew, you would say, oh, you came from a good line of people. Okay, you got good people. Verse 6. Who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with King Jehoiakim of Judah. He lived at a time where they didn't live in Israel anymore, that Nebuchadnezzar of the ancient Babylonian Empire had come in, torn down their wall, and taken them into captivity. They were slaves in Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. Later, the Persian Empire rose, and they took over the Babylonian Empire. It doesn't mean that the Babylonian Empire went away. It just means they became more powerful. So a lot of the slaves that lived in Babylon now were slaves in Persia, which is modern-day Iran. So this is where this man ends up living. He's in Iran. He actually lived in Israel. He got taken as a slave, and then later he ends up in the Persian Empire as a very significant man, but out of his culture. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's kind of like, hey, we're from the South, and now all of a sudden we have to live up north. You ever had that happen? And now they're not eating grits, they're eating cream of wheat or something. And you're like, what is happening here? Right? I mean, yeah, okay. Anyway, you get the idea. All right. Verse 7. You're going, what does this have to do with Esther? Now you're going to find out. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure. We'll get to why we're talking about that, and was beautiful. That seems to be out of place, but it's not. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Now you're starting to get the picture. Hadassah was a young adult. Her family was related to this guy named Mordecai, and he was more kind of like an uncle to her than a cousin. But when her parents died, he took her as his child, and that kind of sets up the story for us. If there was ever a person that was out of place, it was Hadassah. Most of us don't know her by Hadassah. We know her as Esther. Can I tell you why they called her Esther? That wasn't her name. Because she lived in the Persian Empire, they didn't want her to be beat up because she had a Jewish name, so they changed her name to Esther. That's why she's known as Esther. It wasn't really the name she wanted to be known by, because that wasn't her culture. She grew up Jewish. She grew up understanding the customs of the Jews, but then her parents died, and now you're out of place because you live in a place where your customs are nothing like yours. You're living in a place where nothing they do really makes sense to you, and now you don't even have your own parents. And the only person that cares about you in the world is a cousin named Mordecai, who's kind of a father figure in your life. And that's kind of where we pick up with the story of Esther. And so what I want to do is this. I want to give you some snapshots from the life of Esther. And if Esther were here today, I think she would come out on this stage and she would say, hey, as messed up as my life was, as out of place as my life was, God has a place for you. God had a place for me, and he has a place for you, even as messed up as the world can be, as displaced as you might feel. If you feel displaced, you might want to lean into this today. So what we're going to do is we're not going to share the entire story of Esther. I wish we could do that in one setting. I really believe it's going to take a series, and I intend to name that series Game of Thrones, and it's going to be about Esther's life, and it's going to be absolutely awesome, and you're going to hear that series one day, but it's not today. Today we're just going to give you a few small snapshots from the life of Esther. So number one, if we look at the life of Esther, finding your place requires. You see, many of us think we can find our place and we're just going to end up there. So you're walking down life's path and then all of a sudden you end up on top of Mount Everest. That's not going to happen. That's not how it works. You're going to have, if you want to find your place, I think Esther, number one, would say this. You have to have great faith and trust. You have to have great faith and trust. The verse I want us to look at is Esther chapter 2 and verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any other woman. Okay, that's going to require a little explanation. I think we just went from Esther was a Jewish lady being taken care of her uncle or her actually cousin who was like a father figure named Mordecai. And now we just said the king of Persia was attracted to her. Now, how did they get to know each other? And let me tell you how they got to know each other. The king of the world had some laws, and some of them were kind of funny, except for they did some bad things. But some of his rules were, if you irritate me, I'll kill you. And so his wife irritated him, and so he had her executed, which is not funny. But what he decided to do was he said, well, now I need a new wife because my old wife didn't do what I wanted, and it's a whole series of when he killed her and all this kind of stuff. But he decided, hey, I don't want her. Find me a new, beautiful, young wife that would replace, and I want you to find the perfect woman for me. So he gave his servants, because he's a dictator, he had absolute power, and so he just could ask for whatever he wanted. And his unbelievable request was, go find me the perfect woman. So they had this thing. How many people watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette? How many people know what that is? Okay, don't watch it. I can't believe some people watch that. Yeah, it's really bad. It's a really bad way to pick a wife. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, it's horrible. But this is how he picked a wife. He said, hey, we're going to have this thing called I'm the king of the world, and you'll be lucky if I give you a rose kind of thing, And so that's exactly what he does. And he brings all the women, he says, go find the most beautiful women, but more than beautiful on the inside and out. And then they spend like months beautifying them and going through spa treatments and doing all these things. And then I will select the most beautiful out of all of them. Okay? That's exactly what he was doing there. And so it says now the king was attracted to Esther because she was one of the beautiful. That's why it mentioned that she had a beautiful figure. That as a young adult, that he selected her. And more than any other woman, and she won his favor and his approval than any other virgin. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. I've heard this story romanced a lot, probably more from the king's point of view, but not from Esther's point of view. This is a love story, but it's a weird love story. And I'm not saying it couldn't turn into something nice or that there was necessarily sexual abuse that occurred, but she was basically trafficked as a slave. She was actually not asked to be, whether she wanted to be with the king. It was, you will be with the king. If anybody ever felt out of place in life, you might think, hey, you get to be the queen of the entire world. But what your probably missing is, hey, you get to be the queen today because where's Vashti? Oh, I cut Vashti's head off and I pulled the crown off of her and I'm going to set it on your head. Are you excited about that? Man, here's how it works. Right now, I love you to death, man. You are the cutest, most beautiful woman in the entire world. But if you aren't the most beautiful, or if you do anything that maybe remotely irritates me, I might, or maybe I just get bored, I'll just move on. Anybody think that's a great deal? That's your lot in life. That's where you are. I'm going to tell you what, if there was ever a time anybody felt displaced, it was Esther. What I want to say to you though is this, is that number one, if you want to find your place, it takes great faith and trust. That's what we'll go back one. It takes great faith and trust. That was number one. It takes great faith and trust. The phrase I want you to write down is this. You can put this in the margin. No place is out of place when you're in God's place. No place is out of place when you're in God's place. Wherever you are, there you are. That's kind of profound, isn't it? You know why I say that? Because here's what I know. Some of us in this room today, here's where you're at. You're in a place where you go, it's almost like the universe has conspired, and you're going, I just don't understand why I'm in this set of circumstances. I just don't understand why life is like this. It just seems like a rolled up mess, and I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to respond to this. But I think what Esther would tell you today is no place is out of place when you're in God's place. Now, if you did it to yourself, my great advice would be stop, okay? If you're doing dumb things that get you in bad circumstances and you just keep doing the same dumb thing and expecting different results, then stop doing it if you're able to do something about it. So don't blame life circumstances on things that you can control. Stop doing those things, okay? That's a side note. The main note, though, is this. If you're in a place where you go, but I've tried and I'm pushing, and you're like Esther, where now it's like this world has just unfolded this way, and I can't control these things, and I feel so out of place, and I think Esther would say, no place is out of place when you're in God's place. God has a plan for your circumstances that you couldn't even imagine. As messed up as this is, she would say, God has a place for you, but it's going to take faith and it's going to take trust. I kind of saw that in my own life when I was a young guy as an associate pastor. I had a guy that mentored me, and I decided, hey, I want to finish off my education, and I want to go to what I considered to be one of the better theological seminaries, Dallas Theological Seminary. And I made a plan to do that, and I applied for a job in Dallas, and we flew to Dallas. And I got to do two things. One is I visited Dallas Seminary, and then I got to go to a church called Stonebriar Community Church, where the pastor is Chuck Swindoll. Some of you guys might know him, some of you guys might not, but he was kind of a hero of mine in the faith, and I wanted to meet him, and I actually did. And some of the people at Dallas Seminary, they were just amazing professors that are there, and I was really excited about maybe having that possibility. I got offered a job there, and I was going to move to Dallas. Which was hard for me because I'm a Redskin fan, so it was really, I loved everything about Dallas. Dallas is an amazing city except for the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm telling you, it was hard. But anyway, couldn't embrace it. And when you wear your Redskin stuff in Dallas, they're not so happy with you, but that's okay. I did it, and I'm still here. But I went there and I met him, and I actually still have a letter that really meant the world to me from Chuck Swindoll, that he encouraged me, and he did that, and we were about to go, and then our life fell apart, and I went down a different journey, and I didn't go to Dallas Seminary. You know, I used to think back, 15, 20 years, getting closer to that now, 15, 20 years ago, I actually thought, I was thinking, wouldn't it have made more sense, God, for me to go to Dallas Seminary? I mean, if I mentioned the names, Howard Hendricks and all kinds of people that I could mention, maybe you wouldn't know their names, but I do, of giants of the faith that could have invested in my life. Wouldn't that have made more sense? God took me down a different path, and I did get a degree, but not from Dallas Seminary. But I think, as I look back over it, that I wouldn't have been able to do the vision that God had in mind for me, the people that God would have wanted me to reach. And as I look at it now, some of the greatest vision comes out of some of the greatest hurts. And I'm only telling you that today because here's what I know, that no place is out of place when you're in God's place. You might not like the circumstances you're in, but maybe you have no power over the circumstances you're in, but God has placed you there for a reason. And I believe that Esther would come here today and she would say, number one, it takes great faith and trust. Number two, it takes great courage. It takes great courage. Just to kind of broad brush this story, and you can read this for yourself, it's a very interesting account. How many people here today like politics? You know, politics and you getting involved, or if you work a job, how many people enjoy the politics of the office or anything else? If you ignore politics, it'll kill you. Did you know that? I mean, like, I don't know if you knew that, but there's politics everywhere you go and how people get in positions and what they want. And if you don't understand politics, you can get messed up really bad. Esther had a very political position. You might not know that. She was queen. She wasn't queen like we have in our country where you go, hey, here's you and your wife and you make a couple. It wasn't like that. It was like, here's the king and here's you and you're totally separate. But you have the ear of the king, but you have to be careful with the ear of the king because the king made rules to say, if you come to me unannounced, some of us wish we could do this at our work. If you come to me unannounced, they'll kill you. I can't help that, right? I mean, like, imagine if you could say as a boss, hey, I can't help it. It's the law. If you come to see me unannounced or you interrupt me, they'll kill you, okay? Sorry, can't meet with you, okay? I kind of like that rule. But anyway, it applied to his wife as well. If you laugh at that, you're going to be in trouble. Okay? But it applied to his wife as well. You can't just come see the king anytime you want. He's protected. You can't interrupt him. And she found out that there was a plot to have a genocide for the Jews. That somebody there had the political will, and it's always that case, that somebody there had either their family had been done wrong by Jewish people or whatever, and you can go back and look through the history and you can find out that there was a man there by the name of Haman, and he wanted to destroy the Jews. And that was his plot. And she found out about it. And now she was wondering, what do I do? And she got this word from her uncle, or from her father figure, Mordecai. Esther chapter 4, verse 13. He sent back to her this answer. Do not think because you are in the king's house that you alone will, of all the Jews, will escape. Verse 14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. I think what Esther would say is this: it takes courage. That's what Mordecai was saying to her. He's saying, if you want to have your God-given place, it's going to take courage. That you might think that you're in the weirdest position and you're faced with a circumstance, and somebody might be here today and you're faced with a circumstance where you have the ability to either jump out or shrink back. And I have a feeling God is telling you today that you're going, I just don't know if I want to get involved, but how do you know that you weren't made for such a time as this? That the reason why God has placed you where you are, as messed up as it is to become queen after Queen Vashti, as messed up as it is for this guy to do some sort of beauty contest and select you as queen, but you are Jewish, he doesn't even know. By the way, because her name was Esther, he didn't know she was Jewish. And now you're going to unveil something to him that may get you killed. It's going to take great risk. It's going to take courage. I want to explain something about courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. And I need to explain that because sometimes when we speak about courage and being afraid, the Bible 365 times says, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. It doesn't mean that you don't feel fear. Yesterday we went skydiving, and I can tell you it isn't the absence of fear. Everything in you doesn't want to go out of a plane. That's not how it is. But if you want to experience it, you got to go out of the plane. So it's not the absence of fear. It's not the absence of the feeling of fear. It means to act even when you know that's the right thing to do, when you know that's the thing that God's calling you to do because it's for such a time as this. Somebody here today, you're faced with this circumstance. And Esther was faced with, I don't have to get involved. I could just back off. I could just not even say I'm Jewish. But that was her God-given place. Can I tell you something? I think somebody here today, that's where you are. You have the ability to either get involved in something that you know that God could change your life and change the world around you for, but it's going to mean that it's going to get real messy if you decide to get involved. How do you know that God hasn't placed you there for such a time as this? No place is out of place when you're in God's place. Number 3, finding your place requires great focus on God. Finding your place requires great focus on God. Esther chapter 4, verse 15, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Verse 16, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights, and I and my attendants will fast as you do. This shows you the maturity of a young adult. I mean, like, she had so much maturity, probably more maturity than I have. That when she's faced with the greatest crisis, what she's going to do is, I'm going to go and I'm going to approach the king, but before I do, I want you to fast and pray and make sure that we've heard from God. Make sure we're going in God's power. When you're faced with life crisis, let me ask you a question today. What do you do? What's the first thing you do? Do you pray or do you act? Do you lean hard into what you know? Do you say, hey, here's a crisis, and I know, well, I don't think about that. I just want to do it fast. I just need to act quickly. I need to go to the king now. I know what I need to do. I know what life is all about. I know what to do. And so when you're faced with life crisis, do you pause and pray, or do you act? Do you pause and pray, or do you make a plan? This is good. Do you plan? Do you think, hey, it's about me making a plan, or do you fast and pray? Let me ask you another way. When you're in a crisis, do you run towards church or away from church? Are you more apt to ask people to pray when you're in crisis, or are you more apt to just try to handle it? I just handle it myself. I don't ask people to pray for me. I want you to lean into this because I got a feeling these next 2 points could rock your world. They could change your life. They could help you find your place. And the biggest thing is this, is that you don't need a plan, you need God. In every story, every hero of the faith, if Esther were here, she could say, hey, I'm not alone in this. This is not just my principle. This is the principle, man. You got to learn this principle that says this. When you're in crisis, you've got to run towards God. And when I say church, I mean his people. Do you have people pray for you, or you just keep that all to yourself? Because you will fail if you don't have God's power. She realized, before I go to the king, I'm not just going to rush in there. I'm not just going to, hey, pretty myself up and plan to do it in my own power. I need all of us praying, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to face this thing. But before I do, I need to have great focus on God. I want to give you a verse to think about today. It's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says this, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths clear. Somebody here today, you're going, my path isn't clear. I can tell you why. Because you're leaning hard into self and not God. When life doesn't make sense, do you lean hard into yourself, or do you lean hard into God? This is important. If you want to have your God-given place, you've got to lean hard into God. This isn't a story in the Bible, it's the story in the Bible. If you read about all the other heroes of the faith, when Moses came to the Red Sea, let me tell you something, he never thought in a million years God was going to part the Red Sea. That wasn't about having a plan. That was about Moses leaning hard into God. When Joseph was in prison for almost 20 years, I can guarantee you he had no idea what God's plan was, but he leaned hard into God and saved the world. David, when he faced Goliath, he didn't lean hard into self, he leaned hard into God. When David faced Saul, the king, and didn't become king for 20 years after his calling and tried to be killed, he didn't get there by leaning hard into what he knew or his planning. He leaned hard into God. I can keep going all day, but let me tell you something. Let me ask you a question. What do you do first? Do you lean hard into self, or do you lean hard into God? See, so many of us are trusting our own plans. If that's where you're at, then I'm going to tell you today, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to say change something. When you run away, here's the thing. God has given us gifts, and I don't just mean mine, but when I say, do you run away from the church, God uses all of us. That's why Esther is so profound, because he says, I'm going to fast and pray, and I want you to fast and pray. And we have seen this before in Scripture, and then God will give a word, but it's not always to you. Typically, God gives somebody else what you need. That's why you can't do this alone. That when Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't keep all the gifts. He dispersed them amongst us. And no person has all the gifts. So to say you can go to God and he's just going to speak to you and no one else, that's a mistake. Read the book of Acts and you'll see he speaks to all of us together. I have what you need and you have what I need. And together we become the body of Christ. So let me ask you a question. What do you do when you're in crisis? Is your path clear? Or do you rush out ahead? Are you kind of like me? I don't even want to bother with a plan. Let's just do it, right? You know, sometimes we need people. Yesterday, I jumped out of an airplane, and it was tandem, okay? Thank God, because I had no idea what I was doing. If it hadn't been for the guy on my back, I'd be dead right now, okay? I'm telling you, right? You need other people that know what they're doing. I remember the guy saying, hey, just let me do some of this stuff for you, right? Some of you guys, I never let anybody do for me. I'll do for other people. I don't let anybody do for me. And you know what? The reason why you don't have your God-given place, and you wonder why you're displaced, because you're not part, and it's time, okay? Lean into God. Lean into God, and he will make your paths clear. Lean hard into God or lean hard into self. You decide, but it will decide where your place is, and she could have messed this whole thing up if she hadn't paused here. Okay, number 3, focus. Great focus on God. Number 4, it requires great initiative. These last two go together in a way, they're symbiotic in a way that I can't hardly describe, because most of the time we either teach one or the other, but today is the aha moment that goes, they both go together. Verse 16 continues to say this. It says, I will go to the king. This is after she said, hey, let's fast and pray. And then she says, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. You want to know what the key word is here? Go. She took the time to have great focus on God, and then when God spoke, can I tell you what she did? She did what God said. This is why she's so amazing. If there was a problem for us as church people, I would say this. Some of us like to seek God, but we don't like to do what God says. We like to gather and learn the knowledge, but never come to the knowledge of the truth. That's kind of how Jesus put it. And the reason for that is here's what we do. We go, man, this is a whole difficult situation. You know what I need to do? I need to seek God. That's really good. And we pray about it, and we pray about it, and then God tells us what we need to do. We know it. We know what God does. Right? There's a way of hearing God's voice, and we know it, and it's been affirmed by some other trusted people. And then we go, well, I don't like what you said. Right? You ever done that? Who else can I ask? Right? If you were a kid, you know what it's like. You go to your mom and she says, "What does your dad say?" Right? And then you go to him, or hey, mom's going to let me do this, but dad wouldn't, or dad's going to let me do this and mom wouldn't, and so you know who you're going to ask. That's kind of how we feel with God. It's like, I don't think I like what you have to say. You want me to go to the king? No, I think I want a different answer. So here's what I need to do. I'm not saying I won't do that, but I think I need to pray about it a little bit longer. Now, don't miss out on question number 3. This is where it goes wrong. I'm not just saying do and don't think. What I'm saying is, when you have seeked God and God has told you what to do, you need to do it. So let me ask you a question. What has God called you to do that you haven't done? You can write the question down this way. In fact, I want you to write this question down. What are you waiting for to do what God is telling you? If God has told you, what are you waiting on to do what God's told you? Can I tell you something it's going to sound spiritual, but it's not? Is after God tells you, then you're going to wait on God? That's not going to work. In fact, Jesus taught it this way. You can look this up for yourself. John chapter 13, verse 17. Before going to the cross, he talks to his apostles, and they're talking about just this. And he's going, hey, you're going to have the option, and eventually you're going to keep learning. Right now, you guys don't know a lot, but you're going to keep learning and learning and learning. And the problem with learning is eventually you're going to learn so much, and you're going to do so little. You're going to stop doing and keep trying to learn more. You're going to think this is about, hey, let's see how much we can know. So instead of doing what God says, let's just keep waiting on God once he tells us what to do. And can I tell you what John 13:17 says? Jesus says, now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you keep thinking about it. No. Now that you know what God wants you to do, you'll be blessed if you keep praying about it. No. In fact, in another place it says, you've been better off not knowing than if you knew and didn't do. You will be blessed if you do them. Now that you know, you'll be blessed if you do. I know that this might be a hard concept because it sounds like you're saying not to wait on God. No, I'm saying you wait on God to hear from God, but when God tells you what to do, stop waiting. Do what God says. If you don't believe that, try it in your marriage. Go out and say, hey, you know what? My wife, it's her birthday. I'm going to go out and buy her a great gift, and then don't give it to her. Are you blessed? Oh, you will be blessed, right? But it won't be in the way you think, right? Somebody will bless your heart or whatever, but I'm saying, hey, I'll be blessing you at the end, right? But you're going, hey, you went out and you bought the gift, but you never gave it. It doesn't even make sense, does it? God called you to do something and you're not doing it, and you think, God, you're just not talking to me. You're just not telling me what to do. No, he told you what to do. You just don't like what he said, and now you're sitting on the sidelines because you still haven't done what God's called you to do. Let me ask you a question. What does God call you to do that you haven't done yet? What are you waiting for? I need to pray some more. For what? If he spoke, what are you waiting for? If he's empowered, well, I just don't have all the feelings. No, I know. But what does it take to start? You see, because you got to get this, we've got to get this, or no wonder we're confused by how God operates. And somebody today is the moment that's about to change everything for you. Because some of us, we need to wait on God because we've been rushing out ahead and trying to do our own thing. But some of us, we've heard from God, but we went, well, I don't have all the resources to do what God's telling me to do. And if you're going to keep waiting, you never will. Because that's not how God works. You know what God's saying? Start. What is God calling you to do? You know what you got to do? You got to take the next step. Now, there's nothing like taking the step. You can ask Esther. If she came out today, she'd say, you know what my next step was? I had to step through the doors to King Artaxerxes to save the nation of Israel. That's scary, isn't it? There's nothing like when that door opens and you're going, I have a choice. I can run away or I can step through this door. Or, you know what I can do? I can opt out. Here's where I think a lot of people are. You're still sitting in the prayer chamber praying. I just don't know. It's too scary for me to go. It's too scary for me to go. There's not much about faith that isn't about stepping out. You'll never experience what God has for you if you don't step through the door. You get it? And the first step is whatever God's calling you to do. But see, some of us were waiting because we thought, hey, God's going to resource me now. No, he's not. He's going to resource you as you go. And some of you guys are going, well, if God blessed me the way he blessed Esther, then I would do it. No, you won't. And no, he won't. Because he'll never give you the resources until you take the next step. So what is it you need to take the next step for? I don't know what it is for you, but maybe you've been incognito for a while. You've been coming, but nobody really knows you. You're kind of like, hey, you're not really part. You just keep coming and you sit in rows, and that's okay. If you need to do that for a while, we're not here to beat you up because we've all had to do that. And if that's where you need to be at and God wants you there, that's fine. But some of us, we're going, hey, I need some deeper relationships and I just don't feel like I'm close to anybody, but you've never taken a next step. Maybe your next step is you need to sign up for the pastor's meal. Maybe you've been here a while and you've never signed up for the pastor's meal, but you keep coming, but you've never had the connection and you're going, but I don't understand why other people have connections, but I don't. But the reason is because you're still incognito. It's kind of like going online and you click incognito and you're wondering, why doesn't anybody message me? Well, it's because you've disconnected. You're not connected to anyone. And here's your first step to do it. You mean that? Well, I just want it to work out. Can I tell you again? You won't summit Everest until you take a step. Get it? You'll not get there until you start to do it and then maybe developing a plan and doing all the stuff that it takes. But you've got to take a step in that direction or you'll never make it there. It's not going to be somewhere over the rainbow and all of a sudden we go, how did I get on top of Everest? God just placed me here. Nowhere, not one. And if Esther were here, she would say, not one of the giants of the faith got there. And it didn't take step by step. And God met their needs as they stepped out in faith. Some of you, God has all kinds of miracles for you, but you've got to step out in faith. Maybe it's the pastor's meal. Maybe it's you've never actually said, hey, you know what? I want to publicly proclaim my faith in Christ. I've always kept that to myself, and I didn't want anybody to know about it. But we're having water baptism next month, and maybe it's time. Maybe you say, I've never publicly declared it because I just didn't want to put myself out there. But maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to be part with some other believers, that we have community groups and you go, I've always wanted to be in a relationship, but I just don't know about doing that. And it's going to take a while to get into that, but you got to take a next step. Maybe it's serving and you go, I think God has an incredible plan for me, but you've never signed up to serve. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's God called you to be a pastor and you need to have a conversation with a pastor and say, hey, how do I start that process? Because you're not suddenly going to just be on stage or plant a church or do other things, but you got to take that next step. What is your next step? What is it that you're scared to take? What is it that you believe that God is calling you to do? And I think Esther would say, you know what you got to do? You got to take the next step. It takes initiative. So here's how I'd like to wrap it up. I'd like to wrap it up this way. Some encouragement from Esther. And I think she would come here and she'd say, John, I need you to get out of the way just for a minute, and I want to give these people some advice, okay? And here's what I think she would say. When you don't understand, stay steady. When you're going through life and you just don't understand what's going on, stay steady. Keep trusting in God. Number 2, when you realize God's purpose for your life, you will feel empowered. When you lean hard into God and you realize that God has a purpose and a plan for your life, and God had a purpose and a plan for Esther's life, and if you read about it for yourself this week in the book of Esther, it's absolutely amazing that God saved the entire nation of Israel because of what she did. You will get empowered as you step out in faith. The third thing is this. When you know God is in control, it's easier to take the next step. When you know that God is in control, it's easier to take the next step. When you put your faith in God, it's easier to take the next step. When you know that no place is out of place, when you're in God's place, it's easier to take that next step. So the question I want you to write down is this. What would you do right now if you really believed God was in control? Can I say that again? What would you do right now if you really believed that God was in control? That's a tough question, isn't it? What would you do? You know what I think Esther would say? Start. Whatever that is, take a step out. If you really believed that God was in control, what would you do? I think that's the question that God has for somebody today. Will you take that next step? Let's stand for prayer.